The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. A phrase I very much was going to have tattooed on my body at one point in my life. Seriously considered it. Seriously considered that line.
I mean, it's a beautiful
The other
line.
one, the other one is "Go now, there are other worlds than these,"
Mm.
also from the gunslinger. And lastly, which isn't technically from the books, but is from the T.S. Eliot uh, poem that these all came from, is "Childe Roland to the Dark Tower came," which is actually just the title of the poem. I almost put a title of a poem on my body, Dale.
I mean, I approve.
This is Hot Topic. This is Say Report Jr.
Hello, everybody.
I'm one of your host companions, Zack,
And I'm your other host companion, Dale Decker.
and we have fixed our audio issues specifically so that I could just fall like just lovingly talk about the Dark Tower forever and make Dale listen while she
Yay.
talks about the movie she saw
Lovingly.
versus the 8 books I've read plus the movie plus some of the comics.
There's comics too?
There
Jesus.
are.
Oh my
Oh,
god.
we'll get
That's
into it.
amazing.
We'll get into it. But yeah, so this is going to be one of our Hot Topic banked episodes for y'all. Um, we're going to talk about literally, this is like, as a Stephen King fan, these books are like my favorite. These are my Lord of the Rings. These are my Harry Potters.
That's amazing.
The Dark Tower is my fantasy series, and I love it because halfway through it becomes Stephen King just talking about himself for a while.
Amazing.
It's like Stephen King created his own Marvel Cinematic Universe for his own books.
Jeez. Like,
Oh, it's so bad.
I had no concept of this, that there
All
was
right.
an entire series when I went and saw the movie. I just was like, I saw a trailer for the movie, and I'm like, yep, I'm seeing that. I'm seeing the
that's because-
hell out of that.
What? Idris Elba as a Western, just like
Yeah.
fucking kick-ass gunslinger?
Yeah,
Matthew
like,
McConaughey just swaggering into his scene and just kind of blank
Owning
face,
it?
just like owning
God.
chewing scenery like it's fucking candy corn.
Yeah.
I love it.
like, I remember seeing the trailer, like, and I'd be like, yeah, no, this is definitely, like, I'm not missing this movie. And I didn't even know it was a Stephen King book when I realized it close to it, but I never knew that there were series or anything like that. I don't have much experience with Stephen King.
I have all
You
the
have
experience,
all the
so
experience.
I'll bring that to the table.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So the Dark Tower series, like I said, it's like I think it's like 3 books in before he finally explains this. But sometime in his life, Stephen King was an English teacher, basically. He wrote Carrie at 30 years old. That got
wow.
famous, and that was in the late 70s. He's like 70 now.
Mhm.
And that was like his breakout book was Carrie. But as a teacher and as a student in school, he read the T.S. Eliot poem "Childe Roland to the Dark Tower came," and he, in his words, like became obsessed with it. And so he writes The Gunslinger in like the early 80s. And The Gunslinger ends up being the first of what became 8 books over like 3 decades. He didn't finish this series until like 2012.
Wow. That's
So,
That's crazy.
so
Crazy.
because like, and it was really only like every 5 or 6 years another book of these would come out. So like there's Gunslinger, and then 4 or 5 years later it's The Drawing of the Three. 5 years after that it's The Wastelands. I'm doing this all from memory, by the way. 4 years after that it's Wizard and Glass, and then you get Wolves of the Kaya or Kala, depending on who you listen to. I swear to God, it's got a double L. I think it's supposed to be Kaya, but every time I've listened to the audiobook, they say Kala, and it messes with my head.
I don't know, because double L would be a L. Right?
You would think it would be like in Spanish, like the double L would be
Yeah.
Kaya, right? But there's a character that shows up in the book who's also a character from Salem's Lot. We're going to get there. Is his name is Callahan, and they very distinctly in the book talk about how like there's such a grand coincidence that Callahan lives in Calla. Oh, God.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I got you. Then
yeah.
it'd be Calla. If that's
If that's going to be in there, it's going to be Calla.
then
It's
it needs
just,
to
like,
be Calla.
The thing is, they don't talk like that. That line specifically comes like 2/3 of the way through the book, so my brain had already convinced itself it was Kaya. It was like, oh,
I
damn
gotcha.
it.
I gotcha.
and then there's Song of Susanna, and then finally The Dark Tower that comes out. And then a few years after all of that, he writes um, The Wind Through the Keyhole, which is like 2 short stories that like take place. They don't take place. They're framed as the characters in the book are talking about the story. So he's like, I don't know, stick it between book 4 and 5 because there's really no other good place for it. If you're going to try and figure out like a canon timeline for where this book takes place, just stick it in there somewhere. Doesn't matter. Which is like the great attitude for this guy who writes these 8 books over 30 years, and his attitude to it is, I don't fucking know where it goes.
Just put it somewhere. Doesn't matter.
So
it's gonna work either way.
So when the movie finally came out, that movie came out after years of like development hell for The Dark Tower in various forms. First, it was going to be a movie. Then it was going to be like an HBO series. Then it was going to be, for a long time, Ron Howard was involved.
Oh, wow.
What he was going to do was, we'll do The Gunslinger as a movie. Then we're going to do the next 2 books as like a couple of seasons of a show. Then we'll put out another movie for this. Then we're going to do a couple more seasons of that. Like the weird way to shift the story around. It was crazy. And eventually they're just like, what if we took all 8 books and shoved them into one 2-hour movie?
Yeah. Oh man, I wish there was more. Like I mean, there is more. I could read the books, and after seeing the movie, I was like, I'm gonna sit down to read all these books. But that never happens with me. I'd like to read them. Maybe this conversation will like inspire me to actually like do it and read the lore, because I don't know. There's so much in the movie that happens that I'm like, this is amazing. I want to know more about these people and the situation where I would read them. So, I don't know, but I would love, it would have been so cool if there was like a TV show and more movies that I could latch on to.
Well, and especially the way the movie ends. The movie ends, open-ended in that they can do sequels. I also think that they were like, there's a good chance we're not getting a sequel on this one, guys. Because this came out this ended up coming out like a few months after it. And it was so huge. And Dark Tower was not. They came out like within a year of each other.
Oh, within a year of each other? I thought you said months.
I think they came out months. Let me check exactly.
Because Dark Tower was 2017. I thought it was... No, I wasn't working at GameStop. Wait, did it come out while I was working at GameStop?
Yeah, Dark Tower is 17. It Chapter 1 is Thank You, Internet.
Thank you, Internet. We are not
at the very least, the hype
internet.
for it was also 2017.
Really?
But it came out, I think, in October. So it actually might have come out after. It might have been that Dark Tower came out in the summer and then it came out in the fall.
I thought Dark Tower was was September. Wow, I got times.
It could have. I mean, it could also be later in September. I'm trying to remember because, like, I saw it while I was still in New Mexico. It's all that time blends together. But I mean, the big thing is that, like, I think what happened was, first off, the Dark Tower itself, because it had been going for years. People were people who are like really into the series, like me, have been waiting for some sort of adaptation, and also knowing in the back of our heads there's no way an adaptation is going to work.
Yeah,
like no one's going to put Lord of the Rings money behind the Dark Tower,
which is really sad because
it really is. Like
kind of deserves it. In my opinion, I think it would have been this huge, awesome thing if people rallied behind it.
And here's the thing: the HBO, like the idea of like an HBO series, like Game of Thrones style for it, would actually probably be best. Because especially because the books, like their lengths kind of go all over the place. The Gunslinger is not a long book.
Yeah.
The audio book is like 8 hours.
Oh wow.
The drawing of the 3 is like 22.
Okay.
It jumps. Like you get into like Stephen King's whole I'm gonna write a 1,000-page book style of writing sometimes with these.
That's great though. It's great that like first of all, never knew that this came from a poem. Never knew T.S. Eliot, you said, right? Never freaking knew that. So the fact that Stephen King appears to have so much passion for this world of that is the Dark Tower is like that makes me so happy and like so psyched about it. And I still don't know it nearly as much as you do. The things that I know are based on the movie, and I loved the movie so much that I bought the pop figures. And that is like a very big tell. If I buy your pop figures, you did something right with me. Like you affected me in some way, and it worked.
And really, like, the fact that you like it so much, when I remember sitting down and watching the movie, and I did like the movie more than a lot of other people that sat down and I think that were like serious fans and watched it and were like, well, this is the disappointment I thought it would be.
Yeah.
I watched it and it was like, it's about what I thought it would be, but I think it's actually fairly serviceable as like as one of the like short stories connected to the Dark Tower series, like lore as a whole. I think it works. I think it works best actually if it's like someone played the weirdest game of telephone and like 3 or 4 people down, that person decided to write a movie based on what they had been told the Dark Tower was about. But in a lot of weird ways, that's exactly like that works.
Yeah.
Because the Dark Tower is so much, and the world that Stephen King created is so much about like trying to figure out shit that happened like years and years and years ago without having any context for it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the movie serves almost perfectly that way. It's like, let me tell you the legend of Roland and Jake and the Man in Black. It's like, okay, well, you're forgetting like 1,000 other characters. But sure, the story is about Roland and Jake. When you really break down those books, though, that book series is about Roland and Jake and the Man in Black. Yeah. That's all it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I when we were deciding this, if this was going to be our topic, last night, you were like, it's kind of crazy to you that I loved it so much because it's so out of context. I remember sitting there watching this movie and being like, yeah, this kind of came out of nowhere. I'm okay with it because they're gonna tell me what's about to happen. They're gonna go into backstory. They're gonna show little snippets of like Roland's past life and all of that. It's gonna work. I'm cool that I have no idea what's happening right now. And I feel like a lot of people aren't good at that.
Well, especially for like larger movies. It's almost like what happened was like you've got the budget of paying Idris Elba and Matthew McConaughey and getting fairly decent special effects in all of that.
And
so you have this like
Dennis for like a couple scenes. Dennis, he's the State Farm, not State Farm, Nationwide guy, right? He's got the voice. He's his dad.
Oh yeah,
Dennis,
yeah. I know who you're talking about. I mean, yeah, and then like any number of character actors and stuff in this movie. So there's a budget behind this movie, but it's also like the B-est of B movies when you really like look at it. Like it is such like which is great. I think it works for it, but it is just like it's such a B movie compared to like again it a few months later coming out and being like hugely like well crafted and well written and all of that.
And look at Sorry.
But I think it works as a pulp story. Sorry. I just think it works as a pulp story.
No. Well, and it's like also look at its legacy. Like the movie has this legacy that almost helps it become this bigger thing in modern day, movie going experiences. Because people know Pennywise, people know like where it comes from. They know Stephen King, all of that. It's crazy that it's crazy that those come out really close to each other. I don't know. But it has that following to help it, I can't,
right.
I hate that it is called It so much.
And somehow still the more popular movie. The most confusing title.
And now Chapter 2 is coming out, which I had no idea that it was going to get a sequel.
That was planned before the movies even came out because of the way the book is written. What they did, like in the book version, quick it diversion, everybody. In the book, in the way that book is structured is that it weaves back and forth between like flashbacks. So it's actually really interesting in that each character is introduced in the first like half of that book. And so you get them as an adult, and then you get the flashback to when they were a kid and interacted with Pennywise, and then like their decision to come back to town and stop it from coming back again. And so when they made the movie, they were like, screw it, we'll just do all the kid stuff for part 1 and all the adult stuff for part 2. And actually,
that's cool.
Well, and it ends up working really well that way.
Yeah. But
It
yeah,
also means that if the first one completely flopped, they at least had some sort of complete story in the first one that they could just like walk away from it if they had to. Again, something that they ended up doing for Dark Tower, in that like they just were like, screw it, just dump all of the lore into this one movie, and then we can walk away from it if we have to, or we leave it open ended.
Well, and it doesn't. At least for me, it never felt like an info dump. It never felt like too much exposition or anything like that. I'm like, okay, you're telling me exactly what I need to know in order to feel what I need to feel right now. Like, that's all I needed. Thank you.
Yeah, like there was definitely there's a version of this movie that's an hour longer that tries to explain things as they go.
Wait, for real?
No.
Oh,
I'm just saying, like,
because I would watch that.
but I mean, like, but it also like tries to integrate more of those characters and ends up being convoluted and all over the place and even more confusing for some people.
Yeah.
Whereas the version that they have is like, okay, like I said, it's like a good like short story, like three people down the line. This is what that story bare bones is about.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the most, if I, as a person who walked into this movie not knowing anything about Stephen King, the only exposure to Stephen King I really had, and this, I mean, maybe I had more, but in my freshman year English class, we were talking about horror or something. We were on like a genre topic, and we were talking about Stephen King, and we read the short story The Mangler.
Oh God!
Now
about the laundromat?
About the
right?
about the demon possessed laundry press.
Oh God, I love
and
that.
I
so fucking dumb. I love it.
I fucking fell in love with that short story. And I have a feeling that I was one of the only people in my class who like was so in love with it and like latched onto it so much, because I'm reading it and I'm like, this is fantastic. The imagery is beautiful. The I was reading it, and there's that moment where the woman like starts walking up to it, and it like, it's just so good. The description is so good of it like breathing, of the machine breathing, and I just remember reading it being like, this is proper scary, but yeah. I'm so excited to see what happens. And like, it totally, that whole time was when we were reading Edgar Allan Poe, and like we had to write our own story of we were talking about like Jaws and like Close to Shore. There was a weird book that came out called Close to Shore, and it was like a narrative fiction kind of thing where it told stories about like real shark attacks and stuff. So, and then we had to write our own shark attack story. So it was like all within this realm of me learning about horror from other, like, not humans being being the source of something scary, like something else. So we read Murder in the Rue Morgue with the gorilla, and then we had to write a story from the gorilla's perspective, and from the Edgar Allan Poe story. So that was really cool. Like, I so latched onto that, and my story basically was about the gorilla just like showing off that it was intelligent, and in showing that it was intelligent, and accidentally killed these people. Is it Murder in the Rue Morgue?
You are beyond my knowledge on that.
I don't remember.
Unfortunately.
I don't remember if it's Murder in the Rue Morgue. It could be called something else, but it's basically a gorilla goes off and it escapes the zoo, and it goes off and it kills people. I could have the title wrong, but so I wrote it from that perspective. Ow. And then I wrote and then we read The Mangler, and I was like, oh my God, now a freaking demon is in a laundry press? This is awesome. And this is a huge tangent to say that all I knew about Stephen King was The Mangler.
No, it's perfect, because I mean, like that.
Like, it. So going into Dark Tower, I had no idea. I didn't like the biggest like confusing part of Dark Tower is that it brings in the shine. And I
Right.
didn't know The Shine was a thing. Like, I know The Shining. I've never seen The Shining, but I know it. But I didn't know that there was a thing, like an entity, not an entity, but like a, yeah, I
It's like
guess
the Force.
it's like a force.
It's like the Force.
It's like the
Yeah.
Force, right? I didn't know that The Shine was like a force, but it's kind of explained in The Dark Tower. So I'm like, oh, cool. Now I know.
Right. Like it's explained enough. And again, that's a thing for like Stephen King fans. That movie is reference after reference after reference as well. It's in the background of everything. When they're in the woods in that or one of the early scenes or around the knocked out carnival, there is a
Yeah.
thing that says Pennywise in the background
Yep,
for
yeah.
Pennywise the clown. There's a scene where they're like in a back room somewhere and there's like a little model car and that model car is Christine.
Yeah.
It's like the same like type of car that Christine is.
The
There's a whole
twins
bunch
show
of stuff
up
going
apparently.
on.
Yeah, I started reading the trivia last night for the movie before going to bed, and it was like stating all of these Stephen King Easter eggs, and I'm like, that's really cool. Like, it's cool that it feels like Dark Tower is like center world, and then all of the other Stephen King stories come from that
That
world.
is exactly what it is
Like,
too. So
that's so freaking cool to me.
yeah. So the perfect transition then, because we could talk about that now. So it's interesting because that doesn't happen at first, right? Like Stephen King has always done this, where he has always kind of referenced things that other things he's written back and forth a little bit. Partly because what he was trying to do is like, this is happening in the real world, and so like this is a real town somewhere, and so there's a history to it.
Yeah.
The biggest one being Castle Rock, with not just a Hulu TV show, everybody. It's a Stephen King reference to no end. Castle Rock is the town like from The Body, which is what Stand By Me was based on, and it's the town
Jesus,
from.
I am learning so much.
Yeah, and it's the town and what's it called? Needful Things. The book Needful Things is actually like it's labeled as the last Castle Rock book because he had written so many different stories and books about Castle Rock, and Cujo takes place in or around Castle Rock. In fact, in The Body, it's great because in The Body, which is written as like. It's someone from the 80s writing about their childhood in the 50s. So he references a dog. Did you ever see Stand By Me?
Yes.
With the
Yes.
with the dog that they're all scared of.
So the thing about Stand By Me is that we definitely like watched it in school, but I was not really paying attention.
So
At
there's
the
a dog
time.
there's a dog at the dump that they're all scared of, and it turns out to be like a little like Jack Russell Terrier. It's not like
Got
at all.
you. Okay.
But in the Body, in the original story, when they talk about that dog, the narrator actually says, Spike was the scourge of Castle Rock and feared by all. It would only be matched years later when so-and-so's dog Cujo went on a massive murder rampage or something like that.
Oh.
Like that's the type of way he would reference his stuff before.
Jeez.
So like, especially like, so The Shine, we talked about The Shine and the Shining, like Danny from The Shining being telepathic and all of that, and having this like weird connection to things. That's not called The Shine until like book 5.
Yeah.
They don't get anywhere near that. It's called The Touch early on. And then at some point he decided that this was all going to be connected. And so he started like The Touch, sometimes called The Shine. And the next thing you know, it's always called The Shine.
Crazy. That's so cool. I can't believe I never read Stephen King.
Because what happens is Midworld, where Roland is from, ends up being like, he's doing that thing where it's like, oh, this is the world where a lot of our stories come from. Some people are connected to it and can see into it, and so like there's Wizard of Oz references, and Roland is very much based on like old Wild West cowboys and stuff. So it's like, oh, so like Clint Eastwood's characters and all of these old cowboy westerns were all based on like Roland's people and all that stuff, which is great. But what's really great is once book 4 and 5 and all of them start coming out, is they would do this thing at the front of a lot of Stephen King books. They probably do it in other authors too, but Stephen King especially, because he's got 1,000 books, where there's like a list of all of the books he's written and all of the things he's published, so you can see them.
Yeah.
And in like book 5, they start doing a thing where they bold and asterisk the ones that are connected to the Dark Tower series.
Okay, that's
and you just start seeing more and more and more of them being connected in different ways. And it's like, this is a story where like these have characters that cross over, or these are directly connected stories, or these are stories based on it.
That is so cool to me. That is something that works so well with me. Like it there I mean, to the point where, I don't know if you know, another tangent, small tangent, the Chicago PD shows and
Oh
the
yeah,
Chicago Fire and Chicago there's the
medical
medical
or something, right?
medical
Yeah.
like that works for me. It's cool that those all are linked. It's cool that I mean, I think there's that theory or whatever, or it's truth that like all the John Hughes movies happen in the same town or whatever. That could be something else. But
That's a Jay and Silent Bob reference,
yeah.
but
But like it's not far from the realm of possibilities. Like it's just that connection is so cool to me. I love
yeah.
it.
And what's great is like it also like it bleeds over not into just like characters crossing over, like I said, like there. And what's great is like the priest from Salem's Lot. The reason that it's so funny to have the priest from Salem's Lot show up in the Dark Tower is that in Salem's Lot, that priest literally like gets on a bus and leaves. His whole like thing is that he tries to stop the vampires in Salem's Lot, and he's completely like knocked down because he has lost all faith, and so he basically just like puts his head between his legs and fucking bolts.
Jeez.
And so what they say is like when they bring him into the Dark Tower later, he shows up and he's like, "Yeah, I went drifting through town through the country and trying to find my faith again, and then I accidentally basically walked through a fucking portal into this
Oh
town, and so I
jeez.
live here now." Because the whole idea of like the tower is getting weaker and it's going to fall, and that means that like reality is bending and
Yep.
all of these worlds are bleeding together. You can start just kind of drifting into these other worlds by accident.
That's
um,
crazy.
and then you get books like Eyes of the Dragon and The Talisman, which are basically Dark Tower stories like adjacent. So Eyes of the
Like
Dragon,
spin-offs.
kind of. So Eyes of the Dragon is like straight up fantasy. It takes place like, but has like Martin the Sorcerer, who is the Man in Black, and it has a
Oh.
prince named Roland, and it takes
Oh.
place in Midworlds.
Oh jeez.
But the reason that he wrote that is that his daughter. Interesting. I was literally just reading this yesterday. I swear to God, I don't know this entirely off the top of my head, but his daughter was born with like she doesn't like produce adrenaline
Oh,
and
okay.
at the same rate that like most people do,
Yeah.
which means that she actually can't get scared very easily
Oh wow.
because the whole like fight or flight fear response is all adrenaline based.
Yeah.
So she basically turned to her father one day and was like, "Your shit's not scary, Dad. I want to tell you." She says to Stephen King.
Yeah.
And so he was like, so she didn't like horror movies and she didn't like horror books. And he was like, "Fine, I'll write you a book." And what he wrote her was Eyes of the Dragon. It's like dedicated to her and everything. And
Oh.
it's just basically like, again, much like the movie, just kind of like, what if I stripped the Dark Tower stuff down into one short little fantasy book
Yeah.
and did that. And then The Talisman is this book about this kid who his mother gets sick. I think he's living in like, I think it's Maine. It's usually Maine. And his mother gets sick, and he finds out that if he goes across the country to California, there's a tower somewhere with a magic flower in it that will help save his mother. And so like does this whole, I'm going to go across the country, and ends up drifting into another world and coming back because of all of these weird portals. And gets to this tower in California, and it pretty much is the story of the Dark Tower again, just down into one book, and like drifting into different worlds, and all of these things come across and stuff like that.
That's
So,
amazing.
so it's all these ideas and these themes and stuff that are just kind of in and out of Stephen King's books all the time.
Yeah.
Really.
That's so cool. Now I gotta read more Stephen. I like had no concept of. I thought Stephen King stuff was all just super super creepy and scary, and I was not gonna have any
I
part
mean,
of
his
it.
his
But,
early
like-
stuff, yes. Like these days, and like in mid, and even early on, but like his early stuff is definitely like his horror days,
Yeah.
and these days it's much more like dark fantasy is probably a better way to put
Well,
it. Like there's still like horror elements, but he gets like a little bit more fantastical with his
Yeah.
stuff.
Well, I'm fine. I like horror elements. I do like. I say that I don't like creepy or scary things. I do. I really do like those things. I want to choose what I'm being creeped out by. And dark fantasy is really what it is really what I like to gravitate towards and be freaked out by, because at the end of the day it's fantasy, and it's with fantasy there are scary things, there are dark like forces and all of that. So jeez, I just had no idea that Stephen King was doing like fantasy things.
Yeah, yeah, and
Too.
like I said, like he dropped into in and out of it for years. Like Gunslinger is probably is like his first like real like fantasy
Yeah.
books, like
Yeah.
early on, and he dips in and out of that. But I was going somewhere with this, and I can't remember what now. Oh yeah, so I mean, again though, like all of that connective tissue stuff, even though
Yeah.
he had like hinted at it for years, a lot of that connective tissue stuff doesn't come until much later because of, and I think this might be why I might just be projecting at this point. But do you know about his like massive like hit and run when he was like the early 2000s? I think
like
it was maybe
like
late
a
90s.
like a literal hit and run?
Like he got bashed by a van that then
No.
ran off. Yeah.
No.
So I think it's between book 3 and 4 is when this happens,
Oh
because it comes
jeez.
up later and like why it took him like 2 or 3 extra years to write the
To
fourth
write
book.
them?
He was. Have you ever seen or have you ever heard of Kingdom Hospital?
No.
It was a mini series. It was actually a Swedish mini series, I think, that he then developed for ABC. But it's like he super Stephen Kinged it up for what he see. But it opens up with actually an almost like play-by-play of this accident he was in,
Oh
because like
wow.
the main character is an artist who was hit by a truck and is like bedridden in the hospital. He's out for a run. Some guy high off his mind with his dog in the car started fighting with his dog about the meat they had in the cooler, and he was like not paying attention to the road and basically just straight on hit Stephen King with like a panel van, just
My
bam,
God.
like laid him out on the side of the road. So there was like a few months where he was like stuck in the hospital,
Yeah.
thought he was going to die, all of this stuff.
Wow.
And like, and so when he gets back into writing and he gets back, especially to the Dark Tower stuff, that's when he starts writing himself into these books a little bit
Yeah.
and getting into that connective tissue stuff. Because like literal scenes where they go into our world and talk to Stephen King and
Jeez.
like entire like, and again, he writes out that entire accident at one point. Like it's just in like book 6. You just read that, or even beginning of book 7, I think maybe. But
Wow.
like he just play by play plays out that whole accident.
Wow.
And like it there's a point at which it goes from being this thing about like the stories he likes and the stories that he's telling and interweaving those into a much more like even more personal story on top of that,
Yeah.
which is just this like really interesting arc for that franchise, that it
That's
goes from like
crazy.
this like the book before his accident, they're on a freaking train telling riddles to the train so that it won't run them
Stop.
into a wall. and then the next book, he's like, well, we got out of that scrape. Now let me spend this entire book telling you Roland's entire backstory for like 2,000 pages, and then we'll get back to the story here in the next book after that, in which robot wolves are going to attack places.
What?
Yes, Wolves of the
What?
Kala is so crazy.
Oh my God.
Wolves of the Kala is insane. He's got robot. He's got like they're in like literal Doctor Doom cloaks. Like he even references Doctor Doom as what they look like.
Oh my God. That's amazing. Oh my God. That's crazy.
These are the things
Jeez.
that you can't put in the movie, unfortunately,
No.
because like these involve like oh, it's like because all of it is in service of, you know, letting you really know who Roland is, and also building up all of these other people around him, just so that like his eventual getting to the tower is like a whole other, has like this whole huge meaning to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas in the book, it's like we need to save the tower, or in the movie, it's we need to save the tower. In the book, it's he just needs to fucking get there because he's so obsessed with it that it's turned him into kind of a monster.
Yeah.
That his obsession of the tower has turned him into kind of a horrible monster.
Wow.
And it's just 8 books of learning about that.
That's so cool. Ugh. I. No concept. No freaking concept of that, of any of that happening.
Yeah.
And that just makes it so much cooler to me. and I probably still won't even read them. But like just knowing that there's that connective tissue as you refer to it, which is cool, and it's just God damn
Yeah,
it. Now
and I don't know how much I would look into the comics. I don't know how many of the actual books have been developed into the comics versus like them being just like even extra stuff, because it's both. I know that I don't know if the Gunslinger itself specifically has been turned into like a graphic novel or some kind, but like there's definitely like comic runs that do basically like that whole backstory from
it,
Wizarding Class is like a comic now, I
yeah.
think.
It
But then there's also
probably
like some after stuff with that too.
it probably speaks volumes that I will most likely find the comics and read those and
Right.
latch onto those instead of finding the books.
Yeah.
I just like I don't know. Comics is a whole other discussion that we could have in the future, but I don't know. Yeah, if there's a comic version of something, I usually will gravitate towards that.
Yeah. And I would also look up like especially the hardcovers. I think the paperbacks also had this, but the novels have like those like every few hundred pages that commissioned painted like
Oh,
nice picture
see that
about
that's
like,
beautiful.
context of what's going on. So there's some beautiful artwork in there.
That's
I think the comics are also where you get more into the King Arthur stuff that comes up in the movie.
yes. Okay. All right.
Because in the books, like you get that it is alluded to that like Roland might be a descendant from some version of King Arthur,
Mm-hmm.
but the whole the guns being made out of Excalibur, I
Yep.
think, is mostly the comics in the movie.
That's
It might be a
awesome.
thing that they say it's rumored in the books, and it's like one line, and they pass on from it.
Yeah.
But in the books, in the movie, they especially like make it like, no, this is true.
Yeah.
So that might be from the comics. I don't know about that one, because like there's the whole thing where the gunslingers were like the descended like versions of the Knights of the Round Table kind of thing. That's definitely in the books, and that's like a whole thing about like how you create like the groups, your quartet, your group of people that go with you
Yeah.
and go forward with you on your journeys and all that.
Yeah. That's funny because the kid who plays Jake in Dark Tower is then in The Kid Who Would Be King.
Was he really?
Yeah. He
That's wonderful.
I don't remember who he plays. I don't remember the names, but yeah, he's like one of the bullies in The Kid Who Would Be King.
Wonderful.
And it's great because I'm like oh, this is Dark Tower Kid. Oh, this is Dark Tower Kid. Oh, you're a jerk. No, go back to being the Dark Tower Kid.
Ah, Jake. Jake
Oh,
is such a
God.
wonderful character.
Yeah.
Jake is a wonderful character because Jake dies multiple times in the series
And just comes back.
and just keeps coming back. Because what
amazing.
happens in the like
Ugh.
slight spoilers for like the books, but we'll get into
Yeah.
this because I think it's interesting is how they weave it into the movie. So in the movie, he's having like the dreams of the tower and everything,
Yep.
and it's much more connected to him being, having the shine and the touch and all of that. In the books, the reason he's having these visions is because time travel, Roland time travels
Beautiful.
and stops him from dying,
Oh.
and it kind of splits his brain in two.
Oh, wow.
Because the way that he gets into the original book in The Gunslinger is that he is pushed in front of a moving car and dies and wakes up in Midworld. And it's all the Man in Black just fucking with
Yeah.
Roland.
Yeah.
Because what happens is he gets into Midworld and he travels with Roland. And the Man in Black is like, well, if you want to find me, you're going to have to kill that kid. And spoiler alert, Roland kills that kid.
Wow.
Roland is, again, not a great character.
Becomes a
Like, I mean, a
monster.
great character, a bad person.
Yeah.
So like, and it's actually Jake that like in the end is like has the great line, go now, there are other worlds than these, and then basically throws himself off of like a train cart that's like inside of a mountain into like a river full of murderous mutants.
Jeez.
Yeah. So so then in like the second book he shows up again, and because earlier in the book Roland had basically gone back, and I don't know if this is a little bit retconning. Also might be me forgetting. I haven't re-gotten to that part of the book yet, so I might be mixing some things up. But essentially, Roland stops him from being pushed into the street.
Yeah.
He stops because it's not technically the Man in Black. It's like a whole thing where the Man in Black cannot actually, in the books, cannot actually come into our world the way he does in the movies. and so he has to like possess people, I think, or like get them to
Okay.
do things for him.
All right.
So the guy that he gets to push Jake into the car also, like, years later in that story affects a different character.
Mm.
And so Roland stops him after that, which
Oh.
means he's not alive to push Jake into the street, which means that Jake never dies the first time, which means he never shows up in the, which means he shouldn't have been there in the gunslinger. It's like a whole thing. And so his brain just like
It's like
starts
all
getting all
messed up.
fucked up because he doesn't
Jeez.
understand. Like, he all of a sudden he starts remembering all of these things from the gunslinger that never happened because
Yeah.
he didn't die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, it's
crazy.
great.
That's
Oh, it's
so
great.
cool. That's so cool. Oh my god.
He also has a. There's another reason you're gonna want to at least find the comics, and that's because Jake has a Billy Bumbler, and a Billy
A
Bumbler.
what?
Billy Bumbler is like a raccoon dog,
Oh my
and
god.
he is adorable.
Oh my god.
His name is Oi.
Oh my god. Yeah, so I'm gonna find the comics today.
Yeah, at the very
and,
least, you should just look up Oi the Billy Bumbler.
Oh my
'Cause,
god.
oh man, the raccoon dog. Yeah, yeah, he like befriends this little raccoon dog thing, and it becomes like his little
God.
companion.
Oh.
Books.
Oh my god. That just sold me. I need
I
you to
thought it might.
understand.
I thought it might.
Knowing that there's a raccoon dog. Yep. That's me. I'm there. I'm on board. Jeez.
Yeah. So these books are freaking wild. I love every minute of them, especially because like even when they start to get like fillery, like I'm in the beginning of Drawing of the Three right now, and they're introducing a character, and it's so funny because I get like it's like excruciating detail of like getting off of a plane and going to make a drug deal, and it just like
Jesus.
goes on for a long
For a while.
time. And the
Yeah.
whole time, Roland is watching it through a door on a beach.
Wow.
He goes full being John Malkovich, in which there's a door he can go through into somebody else's head.
That's crazy. That's so cool. Oh my god. This is all stuff that I can't believe is Stephen King. I know I've said that a lot, but I just can't wrap my head around that all of this is Stephen King.
Yeah. And the reason that I was like, I've talked about the fact that like the movie works almost as like a sequel to this book series, getting into like skipping over a lot of actual stuff to talk about like the very ending of that book. He gets to the top of that tower, and when he walks out, he's back in the desert at the beginning of the Gunslinger,
Yeah.
because it's a whole thing about like
A loop.
the cycles of like cycles and loops and
Yeah.
cyclical storytelling and all of that.
Yeah.
But there is like one change. So whole thing in that it starts in the Gunslinger, and you find out about it more throughout the things, where he's got this like horn that's around his belt from his friend Cuthbert. And there's a whole thing about how he doesn't, at the beginning of the Gunslinger, he doesn't have that. Because when Cuthbert died, it was like this whole massive battle. It was like the end of the Gunslingers. It's why he's the only one left.
Yeah.
And all of his friends died, and he left the horn on the battlefield with them. And it was supposed to be this like big symbolic thing that he was like abandoning his past and moving on. And his obsession with the tower got so strong that he started to forget all about
all of it.
being the gunslinger and all that, right? So at the end of the books, he has the horn.
Yeah.
He's walking through the desert again. He's back at the beginning, but this time he has the horn, which is like this big symbol for like he grew at least a little. If he's gonna go through this journey again, at least now he has like learned something.
Yeah.
And so in the movie, he has the horn.
Yeah, I was gonna say I thought I remember seeing a horn somewhere
Yes,
on
and they made
his costume.
They even made a big deal out of it when they were talking about the movie, because there's this weird Twitter side to this.
Oh, really?
Where
course
like they
there
announced
is.
the movie, and they knew that people were going to have misgivings about the movie or fear, so they start talking about like, especially like the horn was like their big thing, right? And Stephen King is involved in all of this, talking about how like, remember that there's cyclical storytelling here, and this
Yeah.
can just as well serve as if he's got the horn, that means something. If this version of Roland has the horn and all of that. And it was also great to watch like Matthew McConaughey and Idris Elba talk to each other like Roland and the Man in Black
Yeah.
on Twitter.
Yeah, that's oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Which is great because I feel like that was Matthew McConaughey got high one day and did that, and Idris Elba was like, "Fuck it, I'm just gonna
play
this
along."
out." Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Oh
Um,
man.
Yeah, so the fact that there are like differences in there, like it's retelling the story differently, and there's characters that have changed or are missing and all of that, it almost works like, well, this is just like this is your epilogue almost
Yeah.
to this whole thing, and
Hmm.
like the start of the new journey that you could be watching instead.
Well, and
Um,
also, like from what I remember, because I haven't seen the movie in a while, but from what I remember, like Roland is like, yeah, I fought him before, and it's like every time or whatever, like he talks about how many times they fought and
right,
how
and that
many times, like how many outcomes there have been.
and it's just
So
vague enough. It's nice because it's just vague enough to the fact that like he's fought him his entire life,
yeah.
not even just because of the cyclical nature of going into the tower and coming back and all of that,
Hmm.
but also because like you find out that since he was a child, the
Yeah.
Man in Black has been like part of his life and like fucking with his family and all of
Exactly.
this stuff.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
like it's just vague enough to work however you want to interpret
Hmm.
it as like as like someone watching it. So it's like
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you,
Like.
as someone who has no context for that, to watch that and be like, oh, okay, I get what he means. And
Hmm.
for me watching that, and I have all of this different context, and like,
Yeah.
oh my God, he's referencing all of this other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, like I was just gonna say when I was watching, I'm like, okay, so clearly Man in Black has just been this entity, this thing in his life, this thorn in his side. Cool. All right, he's gonna get his. It's gonna be great. But like now, I'm gonna rewatch that movie and be like, geez, this goes so
Oh
way
yeah,
deeper than I ever imagined it could.
yeah, and it's wild too with the Man in Black because like he has like three different names going through the damn series. So
Yeah.
sometimes you forget that because he starts off as Martin, and then you find out that he's also Walter. Then you
Hmm.
find out he's Randall Flagg, who is like the devil bad guy from The Stand.
Oh, jeez.
Who is like he's just the guy, the bad guy from The Stand as well, because he's supposed to be this like embodiment of like whatever evil
Yeah.
characters Stephen King has created. Like these are the embodiments of evil. Um,
Crazy. That's crazy.
uh,
That's so cool.
yeah.
Jeez.
The other thing I want to talk about, because I'm sure I don't think, I mean, you haven't mentioned it, so I assume you have no strong opinion one way or the other, but is the idea of Idris Elba playing Roland as a black guy
Yeah.
playing Roland, because it was like a whole thing, of course,
Wait.
because some people are terrible.
Wait. What?
And that Roland, especially in the artwork, is, and I think in the books it comes up, is white.
Oh, really?
In
I
the
had
yes,
no idea.
yeah, because especially for the movie, it really doesn't matter.
No. I
And it
mean,
really
it
doesn't matter.
shouldn't matter.
It,
Like,
it shouldn't. The only reason it comes up in the books is because there is a black character that then shows up in the books, and there's like a whole thing between the fact that he is a white man and she is a black woman,
uh-huh.
and so like not like a. We'll get into it. I was about to say not like a racist thing. Maybe it's racist. I don't know. I'm not the person that really should be making that determination, but like there is storytelling reasons for him to be a white person for some of the books, but it
Hmm.
really doesn't matter. I would argue it still doesn't matter. But for
Yeah.
the movie, it especially doesn't matter because it
Yeah.
never like they took that character out, so it really doesn't matter. Um, but I think I think Idris Elba was fucking great in that movie.
Yeah. Like, well,
He
that.
does stoic. He does stoic and gunslinger very well. So
I mean, like he's just fantastic in anything he does. Like
yes,
that's what it basically comes down to. Is Idris Elba? Idris Elba, can't say his name right now. Can freaking do anything in my opinion, and it will be okay. Like he's going to carry the character and carry the story the way that he will. Yeah, that
yeah,
and
absolutely.
that's definitely like him and Matthew McConaughey definitely sold me on going to see this movie, along with it being a fantasy and being this like crazy world. And I'm like, okay, yeah. So two of like these awesome actors who I enjoy all of their movies pretty much, and who just make every single film fun. They really do. Like, yeah. So
Yeah.
it had
So
no. I didn't even know that. Like, I had no
yeah,
idea there was.
again, it's
Also,
oh, man,
people
it's so
shouldn't
interesting
have
to
an
do.
issue with that.
No,
Like,
the
I
the reason
don't-
they had issues, I'll give you the two reasons. Well, I mean, aside from racism, the issues they
Yes,
brought up
but-
with it. One is just, again, the artwork, like especially the Dark Tower the book 7, which is titled just the Dark Tower, has Roland on the cover and he's white. Same with the gunslinger. So like they're basing it off of that, and also there's a lot of like Clint Eastwood references to
Yeah.
him because, of course, there is. It's
Yeah.
fucking, that's who you think of when you think of Westerns
Yeah.
for the most part.
See, I think of John Wayne. But anyways.
Well, there you go. But again, white guy. I mean, that's the
Yeah,
thing. Like,
exactly.
and that's entirely because of the way that American Western film has decided that all of these big cowboy actors would be white, despite the fact that there were plenty of black people in the West. It's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know. I'm like a firm. I mean, like you say that there are specific story elements as to why he's white in this book.
right.
Like,
No, I'm gonna. Yeah.
like there, when I mean, going back to like my screenwriting class and whatnot, a huge thing that I took was like the character's gender, bare bones, a character's gender or race or anything like that, unless it is specific to the story and specific to the plot, really shouldn't matter. So,
Right.
like, not to, to bring, because I was just having this discussion last night. This episode's gonna be coming out after this discussion. Whatever. Time is weird, right? I was just having this discussion because we saw The Hustle, and the thing about The Hustle is basically it's a like retelling of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. And the thing about that story is it is a story that can be told with any gender, with any race. It does not really matter, but you can add certain story elements depending on what kind of person you have playing those characters.
Which
But,
is
like,
essentially how the
that's-
book ends up working.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like that's how storytelling should be, is that it should be anybody can be this character. But because this character looks or acts this certain way, there might be different things that they have to deal with.
Right.
And
which is a
yeah.
which is a perfect transition into the. I mean, we're what 40 minutes in, so this is probably be
50,
perfect,
51-ish,
perfect timing.
Yeah.
Oh right, because anyway, we edited out something. I was like, why does my timer say 41 minutes? Okay, this is perfect because then we can talk about the two like main characters that were cut out of this story for the movie, and that's perfect because timing wise it'll work out and it explains this. So the reason that I talk about how like the storytelling works, and again, the storytelling works because Stephen King wrote this character like as a white guy, so of course when someone's going to come in and like react to something in race, him being white's going to come up. Again, I will argue in a second why I think in the movie it would have worked out fine. So there are two characters that aren't in the movie that are, throughout the series. They're part of the whole like family that he finds in this, along with Jake, and that is Eddie Dean and Susanna, who is also Detta and Odetta. We'll get into her in a second. Eddie Dean's a quick one. He's a junkie from the 80s that Roland pulls just like Jake pulls into his world. And he becomes like another surrogate like son and like older brother to Jake and like son uncle thing with like nephew thing with Roland. It's a whole thing. Aaron Paul was like gunning for that position. When we all thought that character was going to be in the movie. Yeah. Like literally like Aaron Paul's character from Breaking Bad is Eddie Dean. Like they are like very much the same character.
Yeah.
Like the like recovering junkie, imprinted on really shitty dude that's like gonna drag him along for his own purposes, almost perfectly. Aaron Paul would have been great in that role. I'm sorry he didn't get to play it. Anyway, he's not as interesting as Susanna. So Susanna's a black woman from the 60s who, when she was younger, got a head injury because the guy that pushed Jake into the street he was called a pusher because he had a habit of like either pushing people into things or pushing things on top of people to hurt them because, I don't know, crazy man. And so in the 60s, he dropped a brick on I think Odetta is her original name, and I think Detta's the other one, and then Susanna's later. It's a confusing character. She's also the best character in the whole damn series. Drops a brick on her head, causing a head injury that causes split personality. Oh, so Odetta would sometimes slip into Detta. So Odetta is I'm trying so hard to make this as clear as possible and I
That's
realize
fine.
like when
You're
you're not
good.
looking at them, it's not. So Odetta is daughter of a her father's a dentist and like he's upstanding member of society, and so and so in the 60s when the civil rights movement is happening, it's like a big thing that I think you're introduced to her getting like bailed out of prison after protesting with the civil rights movement and all this stuff.
Mm,
But she's in a wheelchair because of the accident.
yeah.
And oh, that's what it was. He doesn't drop a brick on her head. Oh no, I think both. I think he drops a brick on her head when she's younger, and then he pushes her, and then years later he pushes her onto like a train track, and her legs get cut off.
Jesus.
Yeah,
All right.
and it turns out that it's the same guy that does both, and then Roland kills him, and then he can't later push Jake or something. I
Yeah.
don't remember. I'll explain later after I've finished the book on Audible. But anyway,
Not
so she's got
sponsored.
this. So, yeah. So so that's Odetta. That's her base personality, who she is normally. Then sometimes she would slip into Detta, and Detta is like the most stereotype that like a white person is going to think of like a black person in the 50s. Like every bad stereotype that they would glob onto them
Mm,
is Detta, and it's supposed to be Stephen King like this is her way of like she does everything right, and this is still how people view her.
mm,
And I mean, he doesn't say this outright, but this is kind of the feeling you get, is that like Detta is supposed to be like everything that people are going to assume about her as a black woman, no matter what, no matter how proper and upstanding and good she is, they're always going to have this view of her as a black woman because hey, we don't like black people in America, ha. So you get this whole thing with her, and so when she's brought over by Roland, it becomes like a whole thing that like, oh, these two white guys just dragged this black woman into like God knows where.
mm.
And so she's reacting to that. And she does like, and she makes comments about them both being white, and she makes and all this other stuff. And then I forget how, but they managed to somehow merge the two personalities into Susanna.
Mhm.
And Susanna is there through the whole series. She's fucking fantastic. She's like the most badass out of all of them. She has this awesome thing in Wizards of the Collar. She throws these like razor sharp like frisbee plates at things
Oh,
and cut
sweet.
their heads off.
That's
Oh, it's
cool.
great.
That's cool.
So yeah. So when you talk about like Roland is white in the books, Susanna's in like Detta, especially her reactions to him as a white guy are like the thing that comes up.
Yeah.
But I would argue, again, that's a reaction to how the character was written. If she had been in that movie and you have Idris Elba there, you could just as easily have like whatever race conversation you want to have
Yeah.
with like this blatant stereotype angry black woman versus this stoic black guy, and you could have all of these conversations still about race, and that wouldn't change that much at all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I never had a problem with like Idris Elba being put in that role before we even knew that Eddie and Susanna would not be in the movie.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I gotcha.
yeah,
Yeah. That's crazy.
but yeah, that's it's weird too, because like after that, there's really no conversations about race in the entire thing. I mean, there's so few people left in Roland's world. Ooh, you okay?
Yeah. I just dropped something.
There's like so few people left in Roland's world that like race never really comes up.
Yeah.
No one ever like, at least so that I can remember, no one is ever like concerned that a black woman has shown up or anything
Yeah.
like that. So whatever.
Yeah. Exactly. So, I mean, in an ideal society, race and gender and sexuality shouldn't matter. So,
Especially
everybody
when
is
you're
just
talking
a
about
person.
when you're talking about a world that is post-apocalyptic
Yeah.
at this point,
Yeah.
that is literally
like
falling
there-
apart at the seams.
There's other things that we need to be worried about.
Yeah.
Surviving. And dealing with this dude who's trying to break reality.
Yep. Oh
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
Oh God. And just the references that he continues to make through all of these books. There's a building that is named after a single misprint of a book that happened in like the 80s. Like the first run of a book was misprinted
Oh, wow.
and then fixed after that. And they named the building after whatever the misprint was. Because Stephen King had to be like, "Ha, I know books. Screw you." So
Wait, in the movie or in the
no, in the books.
in the books? Okay.
Yeah, there's something called I think A hogan is what it's actually called. It's like a metal tent or whatever.
Yeah.
And there was like a book called the Hogan, but when they were first printed, they were misprinted as the Dogan, and so they call it
Oh.
the Dogan.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure. Why not?
Jeez. Oh man.
uh,
Yeah. It's Dark Tower.
so yeah, I mean, that's the kind of base tech like context of the Dark Tower. I'm sorry if I like spoiled like a bunch of stuff if anybody's out there who wants to
No,
like read the books, but quite
it
frankly, it's
doesn't
still
feel
worth
like
it.
it. Like,
Believe me, I have given you such bare bones
yeah,
compared to the thousands and thousands of pages of the Dark Tower.
yeah. Like it honestly didn't feel. It kind of just felt like plot points.
Yeah.
Like, but I don't know how anything happens. You know, like that's what I want to see. That's
Yeah.
what I want to know.
So
But-
definitely go out there and look for like the comics, like I said, are out there. Some of them
Yeah.
are like
Yeah.
ancillary, and I don't know how much context you need from the books to understand
Mm-hmm.
those comics. And some of them are just the stories.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I'm trying to think if there's anything. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I feel like I'm gonna hang up this call and be like, wait, there was like 20 other things I could talk about.
I mean, it is a
But-
big, considering how many connections the Dark Tower has to other things, and how, I mean, that whole discussion we had, like, it's a huge topic.
Yeah,
We covered a lot.
I didn't even go into all of Stephen King.
No,
God,
we
it's a whole
didn't.
other hour. I
That's
could
a
do.
whole nother thing that we could do. I know that.
Oh, you know what? I knew there was one other thing I wanted to mention because I wanted to see if you knew this. Do you know the movie Hearts in Atlantis with Anthony Hopkins?
No.
So, Hearts in Atlantis, as a story, is Dark Tower related
Oh, really?
because the whole thing about the old guy is running from these bad guys that are just the bad guys from
Yeah.
Dark Tower. He was one of the ones that, like, I think at some point basically had the shine. So years before they were going with just kids, they were like testing it on other people, and he was like one of these people they were testing on, and so he ran off and they were chasing him, all this stuff. Then they made Hearts in Atlantis, the movie with Anthony Hopkins, and they just removed all the Dark Tower stuff out of it, and I think he's just running from the mob instead.
Oh, wow. All right.
So technically there was already a Dark Tower movie.
That's
They
funny.
just didn't talk
Well,
about it as a Dark Tower movie.
So, okay, so now that you brought that up, I was not gonna bring this up, but the conversation has made me think of it, and I think even when I saw Dark Tower, it made me think of it, but I'm gonna bring up Twitches again. And
I did not know where that sentence was going.
I'm bringing up Twitches again because in Twitches, so if anybody doesn't know what Twitches is, it's T and Tamara Mowry, they're sisters, who are witches, the twin witches, and they come from the world of Coventry, and they have to leave the world of Coventry and come to the, like, Earth, like, you know, normal Earth, because the shadowy thing is attacking Coventry and breaking it down, and it's starting to break down the real world and all of that, right? Okay. So, in Twitches, one of the sisters has dreams about Coventry and about, like, their childhood. So that's all I can think of when Jake is having these dreams and, like,
Oh, yeah.
these visions. And, like, she also draws them, whereas
Oh, yeah, 'cause that's also,
he
like,
draws them out.
That's pretty like tropey storytelling
Oh,
at
yeah.
that point too.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, when like Drawing of the Three came out in like 80, I had the dates up 2 minutes ago, like
88.
85-ish. So like you're talking about book. I mean, even by then it was already it was
Oh,
already
yeah.
overused like trope for fantasy and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. But I would not be surprised if, like, somewhere written, like, some trivia somewhere, it says that partially Twitches was inspired by the Dark Tower.
Oh, of course.
Knowing what I know now about the Dark Tower, that it did come out in the 80s and, like, it started in the 80s and all of that, like, knowing that it is basically, it's connected to reality and all of that, like, Twitches, there's definitely this Dark Tower element to it that I've always loved and didn't know was related to Dark Tower. It probably isn't. I'm probably just projecting onto it.
I mean,
But, like-
it's always hard to tell because like there are always people that are like, sorry, I was like on the page. I was checking something. There are always people that have that reference. Like J.J.
Oh, yeah.
Abrams wanted to do a Dark Tower thing for years and like lost
Yeah.
is like like a huge one of the huge influences is the Dark Tower, and Charles Dickens, which I think also probably influenced the Dark Tower in
Yeah.
that everybody knows everybody
Yeah.
for some reason.
Yeah.
I
No.
was looking at who ended up making the movie because I couldn't remember. Um,
But
but
I mean, the fact, like, the way you get to Coventry in Twitches is you go through doorways, you go through portals, and
right,
you have to find the certain portal to get there, and there are other worlds than Coventry. Like, it talks about, like, from what I remember, I could be misremembering, but, there are other worlds besides Coventry. It's just Coventry is the one that's being focused on in relationship to Earth and all that, so it's crazy. I mean, one could argue. Never mind. I'm not gonna do that.
I mean that's
Because
just,
it's
I mean that's the
magic
funny thing
and not the
because basically
shine. But
it's
you
great
know,
because basically all he did was like, well, all things are connected, so
yeah,
screw it.
yeah.
Like,
But it's crazy. Yeah. So I'm happy I got to bring up Twitches again in relationship
and I'm
to
happy.
this.
I'm happy you like that movie because
Yeah.
I was like I said, I remember enjoying it for what it was. I thought there was plenty of cool stuff happening in that movie that I didn't. None of it bothered me as much as it bothered some other people because like I was trying to be realistic about what that movie was going to be.
Yeah.
I think.
Exactly. And I think that's how you have to go into those movies. You have to go into that with like an open mind realism kind of thing. Like, this is not going to be the same as the book, guys.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be okay. That's sometimes okay. So.
Especially considering the gunslinger is like 5 flashbacks in a row. It's flashbacks within flashbacks. Ugh.
Jeez. Yeah, that's crazy.
Which would be great to watch someone try and comprehend.
In a movie?
How many flashbacks in are we now? I don't remember. How many layers deep are we? Okay. I think that's going to do it for this episode, this Hot Topic episode. This will go, I mean, you'll hear this a couple weeks probably after we've recorded.
Yes.
But we're in the pre-game for our Detective Pikachu episode, so we're both giddy. But you can follow us on Twitter at sayreportjr, and you can find us on YouTube at sayreportjr. You can also follow us individually. I am at Zerwisky.
And I'm at Dale's Brain. And you can also find us on Spotify. You got that
Oh yeah,
Spotify
I always
plug.
forget that. Yes, Spotify,
It's new.
Spotify.
Yeah, this is
I
great.
really wish I had a good quote here, but I exhausted the There Are Other Worlds Than These thing already.
You
This
could
is the only
just-
good quote.
You could say the gunslinger, the first one. The man in black.
Oh
flying
yes,
across.
because
That's
oh
like
yeah,
a
because
good
cyclical
bookend.
storytelling. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Oh, I didn't tell you about that. Doesn't matter. I knew there was so. Doesn't matter. We've already done the outro. Oh, this series. Bye, everybody.
Say
Go
the
get
line
us.
of dialogue. I want to hear it. I want it to be the bookend.
The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed.
Take it away, Liz.
Thank you for listening to The Say Report with your hosts Dale Decker and Zack. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.